I grew up in two worlds. The first one had no internet, no scrolling, no algorithms deciding what I should see next, just the sound of the neighborhood outside, a bicycle, and calling a friend out of the blue to hang out. No planning, no texting ahead, just the assumption that someone would answer and say, "Yeah, come over." Then the second world arrived, and it arrived fast. I remember the sound of dial-up, that strange mechanical handshake between my computer and something enormous and invisible. And then, suddenly, I was connected to a vast world rich with imagery, text, and video from minds across the world. It felt like a door had opened in my bedroom wall, and behind it was everything. It was revolutionary to my lifestyle. That alone could have been enough, but it wasn't. Because then the entire internet got folded up and placed in the palm of my hand. A device I could take everywhere. A portal always open, always on. The internet superhighway and the smartphone changed my life. And I watched it happen in real time, old enough to remember what came before, young enough to adapt completely. And now there's this, AI. And I'll be honest, I'm thrilled. Not in a hype cycle way, not because of the noise around it, but because of what I've personally found I can do with it. I use AI because I like to practice what I call mind bending. It's the act of taking abstract ideas and stretching them, comparing them, colliding them, relating them to each other until something new appears, a new picture, a new idea. Asking questions that push the boundary of my knowledge and then sitting with what comes back. It's less about finding answers and more about expanding the shape of how I think. AI helps me with this. It's not perfect, I know that, but it doesn't need to be perfect to be useful. It just needs to keep getting better, the way every meaningful technology has gotten better through time. The internet of 1996 was barely a sketch compared to what it became, and we're still early here. What I find genuinely fascinating is this. Right now, companies are racing to develop AGI, artificial general intelligence, a system advanced enough to think for itself, to move fluidly between domains of knowledge, to connect things that seem unrelated and arrive somewhere new. And here's the thing that stops me sometimes. We already do this. As humans, we already possess this magnificent ability without even thinking about it. We mix and match knowledge from any corner of our experience, from memory, emotion, intuition, observation, and somehow arrive at something original. It's easy to forget how extraordinary that actually is. And at least for now, for this particular moment in time, that ability lives in me. In my own mind, the capacity to direct these tools, to ask the right questions, to take what comes back and shape it into something that reflects what I'm actually trying to express. AI amplifies that. It doesn't replace it. I can't wait for what's next. I genuinely can't, because every layer I uncover opens another doorway to things I haven't seen before, ideas I haven't had yet, ways of thinking I didn't know were available to me. And I wonder, what would you do with a tool that could help you see further than you can currently see on your own?
There's a particular kind of conversation I've learned to have with AI. It doesn't start with a task. It doesn't start with write this or summarize that. It starts with a question I'm not sure I know the answer to, about myself. I use AI as a mirror, not the kind that just reflects back what you want to see, but the kind you find in a dressing room, all angles, nowhere to hide. I'll bring it something unresolved, a tension I've been carrying, a belief I haven't fully examined, a pattern I keep noticing in myself but haven't named yet, and I'll ask it to push on that, to reflect it back to me from an angle I haven't considered. What comes back isn't always comfortable. Sometimes it surfaces something I already knew but hadn't admitted out loud. Sometimes it reframes something I thought I understood and suddenly I'm looking at it differently, like rotating an object in your hand and realizing it has a side you never saw. That's the mirror doing its job. But then there's the other side of this practice, because I also use AI as a sparring partner. Now that's a different energy entirely. I like to test its limits. Not to break it for the sake of breaking it, but to find the edges. To ask questions that push past the comfortable, the prepackaged, the expected answer. To bring it something genuinely strange or contradictory and watch how it handles the pressure. There's a lot you learn about a tool by taking it somewhere it hasn't been told to go. And here's what I've noticed. The places where AI gets uncertain, where it hedges or it starts to loop or flatten out, those are actually interesting places. Because those edges tell me something. They show me where human thinking is still irreplaceable, where intuition, contradiction, lived experience, and emotional texture create something that pure pattern recognition can't fully reach. That gap is information. But the mirror side, that's where it gets personal. Because when I question myself through this tool, I have to be honest enough to ask real questions. Vague questions get vague answers. Safe questions get safe answers. If I bring it something surface level, it'll give me something surface level back, and I'll walk away thinking I learned something when really I just got confirmation of what I already thought. The practice only works if I'm willing to actually look. To bring the real thing, the unresolved thing, and sit with whatever comes back. Even when what comes back reframes something I was comfortable with. Even when it asks me a question I wasn't ready for. That's mind-bending in practice. Not just using AI to think faster, but using it to think differently. As a mirror that shows you angles you avoid. As a sparring partner that keeps you intellectually honest. A tool that, if you use it right, doesn't just answer your questions. It changes the quality of the questions you're capable of asking. And I wonder, what question have you been carrying around that you haven't been brave enough to ask out loud yet?
There's something I find endlessly fascinating about the way a thought arrives. Not the polished kind, not the thought that comes out already dressed and ready. I mean the ones that form somewhere deeper than that. I envision them forming somewhere in the dark, in the ether, before they're fully formed, before they have a name. Like something alive taking shape in water before it surfaces. And when it finally does, when it rises up and becomes something I can actually hold, it lands with this quiet weight. Not dramatic, not loud, just meaningful. A subtle yet meaningful impact on my life, my presence, my awareness. One of the thoughts I had today was all about decisions. Not the big ones, not the sweeping, life-altering choices that feel like turning points when you're making them. The small ones. The microdecisions that seem almost invisible in the moment, so small that it feels almost absurd to call them decisions at all. And yet, I took a small break in between all of my work today. That's it. That was the decision. I stepped away, let my mind go quiet for a moment, and then came back. And the clarity that followed, the way the rest of the afternoon opened up, was disproportionate to how simple the choice itself was. That's the thing about small decisions. Their returns don't match their size. They compound. I think about the fish oil pill I take every day. I can't feel it working. There's no immediate signal, no reward that arrives at the same afternoon. But through time, I sort of just feel better. It's not a moment I can point to. It's more like a slow brightening, the kind you only notice when you look back and realize you've been carrying less weight than you used to. And it's not just one thing. It never is. It's the run I go on most days of the week, not because it's always easy, but because I know what it does to my mood for the hours that follow. It's the consistent choice to opt for superfoods, whole foods instead of processed foods, not as a rigid rule, but as a quiet preference I keep coming back to, one that has a subtle yet compounding positive benefit to my biological processes from day to day. It's the vitamin supplements I remember to take, the small rituals of maintenance that don't feel like anything until suddenly they feel like everything. None of these things alone would be enough. That's the part I think gets missed. People look for the one decision, the one habit, the one change that will shift everything. But the architecture isn't built that way. It's built one small decision at a time. And what holds it together isn't intensity, it's commitment. The quiet, unsexy, deeply underrated decision to just keep going. And what I've noticed, what keeps surprising me, is that once you go down this road, it's hard to not see all the rewards of it all. Not just in how you feel physically, but in how the whole texture of daily life changes. Reality becomes more comfortable, more beautiful, more.
It's a strange word to end on, I know, but that's exactly what it feels like. Like life simply becomes more of itself when you give it enough of these small, deliberate inputs over time. So I want to ask you, what's one micro decision you've been making consistently, maybe without even realizing it, that's quietly changing the shape of your days?
Here's something I find genuinely strange about being human. You can know something works. You can feel the evidence of it in your own body, in your own days, and still stop doing it. Not because it stopped working, not because something better came along, just because. Just because the feeling faded, or life got louder, or one missed day quietly became two, and then the habit that was building something real just dissolved. I've thought about this a lot. Why is it so hard to stay committed to small decisions, even when we genuinely know that they're changing things for the better? And I don't think the answer is laziness. I think that's too easy and honestly a little unfair. I think the real answer has something to do with the way the mind relates to invisible progress. When a decision is small, its rewards are also small, or at least they feel that way in the moment. The run doesn't hand you your mood improvement like a receipt. The supplements don't come with a daily update. The whole foods, the breaks, the little rituals of care, they work in a register that the conscious mind can barely detect. And the mind, left to its own devices, tends to trust what it can feel immediately. It's wired that way. It always has been. There's a name for this in psychology: delayed discounting, the tendency to undervalue rewards that don't arrive right away. The further a benefit sits in the future, the less real it feels to the part of the brain making decisions right now. And small habits, almost by definition, are future-facing. Their returns are downstream. Their proof takes time. So the mind does what minds do. It looks for something closer, something with more immediate feedback, something that feels like it's working right now. And this is where I think the real psychological trap lives. It's not that we're too weak to maintain good habits. It's that we're constantly being asked to choose a future self over a present one. And the present self is the one actually holding the vote. The present self is tired. The present self already made 11 decisions today. The present self just wants something that feels good now. And the future self, the one who benefits from all the small decisions, doesn't have a voice in that room. So what do you do with that? I think the first thing is just to see it clearly, to stop labeling the abandonment of good habits as a character flaw and start recognizing it as a design feature, one that you have to consciously work around. Because the moment you understand that your brain isn't broken, it's just optimized for a world that no longer exists, a world where immediate feedback was the only feedback that mattered, something shifts. The self-criticism softens, and in its place, something more useful arrives. A kind of strategy, a willingness to build systems that make the invisible visible, to create small, immediate signals that remind the present self what the future self is counting on. Because that future self is real, and they're being built, or not built, one small decision at a time, right now. So I want to ask you, when you've fallen away from something that was genuinely working for you, what story did you tell yourself about why? And looking back now, do you still believe that story? Every morning, before the world gets loud, I have a practice. I call it MindBending. It starts quietly, a cup of matcha tea, the stillness that exists in a room before the day officially begins. And then I open up and I start to think. Not about my to-do list, not about notifications waiting for me, but about ideas, connections, concepts I half-formed yesterday that are ready to be pushed further today. Mind-bending is exactly what it sounds like. It's the practice of deliberately bending your own mind, stretching it past where it was comfortable yesterday, past the familiar grooves of thought that are easy to fall into without even noticing. It's a complete mental hour to bend spoons with your mind, break new ground, think of things you never thought of before, make mental connections, and do all sorts of mental acrobatics to make the most of life. What I've found is that the mind, left to its own devices in a noisy world, tends to shrink. It gets reactive. It scrolls. It consumes. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop generating and start just absorbing. Mind-bending is the antidote to that. It's a reclamation of your own mental space, a private road that I walk down every morning when I wake up. Part of what makes it powerful is the physical act of writing it down. When a thought lives only in your head, it stays shapeless. It floats. It merges with other thoughts. It disappears. But when you write it, when you can see it physically in front of you, something shifts. It becomes real. It becomes workable. You can hold it up to the light, turn it around, connect it to something you wrote 3 weeks ago, and suddenly a new idea that didn't exist before is sitting right there on the page. That's the part I love most, the interconnectedness, the way a concept from this morning can reach back and link arms with something I was thinking about a month ago, and together they become something neither one was alone. It's an ever-evolving landscape, brilliant, compounding, always building on itself, rather than a mindless repetitive recitation of the same thought. And it doesn't stay contained to the morning. That's the thing about bending your mind early. It stays bent. You walk through your day differently. You notice things. You catch connections in conversations, in music, in the middle of something mundane. The practice bleeds outward, giving you a kind of interconnectedness throughout the day that you didn't have before you started. Self-improvement and self-actualization are honestly some of my favorite purposes in life, and mind-bending has become the engine underneath all of it, the thing that transforms intention into something logical, meaningful, and magnificent. Not just thinking about a better future, but premeditating my own better standing in future days, using the present moment as the raw material for something greater. So here's what I want to ask you. What would change in your life if you gave your mind just 30 minutes every morning, not to consume, not to plan logistics, but to genuinely, deliberately think further than you did yesterday? There's a question I used to sit with a lot. Where do ideas actually come from? Not the surface-level answer, not inspiration or research or experience, but the real answer, the mechanical one. What is actually happening in the moments before something new exists? Because here's what I've noticed about creative work. It doesn't arrive. Not really. Not the way people romanticize it, the lightning bolt, the shower epiphany, the dream that changes everything. Those moments exist, yes, but they don't come from nowhere. They come from a prepared mind, a mind that has been stretched, fed, exercised, a mind that has been bent. Mind bending, for me, is the upstream work. It's what happens before the creative output that makes the creative output possible. Every morning, I spend connecting concepts, expanding half-formed ideas, following a thread of thought further than I took it yesterday. I'm not just thinking. I'm building the conditions for something real to emerge. Think of it like soil. You don't plant a seed and expect it to grow in concrete. The work of mind-bending is the tilling, loosening the ground, aerating it, making it the kind of place where a fragile new idea can actually take root instead of landing on a hard surface and dying. And what I find every time is that the creative breakthroughs don't happen during the creative work itself. They happen in the margins, in the middle of a walk, in a conversation about something unrelated, at 3 in the afternoon when I'm doing something completely mundane, and suddenly a connection I was circling in my journal that morning snaps into place with a problem I've been sitting with for weeks. That's not coincidence. That's the delayed output of intentional mental work. The mind keeps processing long after you close the journal. It runs the problem in the background, quietly, patiently, and then surfaces the answer when you've stopped forcing it. This is why creative people who don't have a practice like this often feel stuck, not because they lack talent, not because they lack ideas, but because they're trying to generate output from a mind that hasn't been fed, They're trying to harvest from ground that hasn't been prepared. Mind bending is the feeding. It's the consistent daily act of putting good material in, questions, connections, concepts, possibilities, so that when you sit down to make something, you're not starting from empty. You're drawing from a reservoir that's been quietly filling all morning. I've felt the difference on the days I skip it. The creative work feels like pulling something through mud. And on the days I've gone deep, really bent something in that early hour, the work that follows has a quality to it that I can't manufacture any other way. A fluency, a confidence. Like the ideas are already warm by the time I need them. So here's what I want to leave you with. Whatever you're trying to create, whatever work is waiting for you, are you feeding it before you try to force it? I think one of the most underrated things a person can do is question themselves. Not in a self-critical way, not the kind of questioning that spirals into doubt or second-guessing everything you've ever done. More like curiosity, holding up your own habits and behaviors like an object you found on the ground, turning it over in your hand, looking at it from different angles, and genuinely asking, why do I do this? What would happen if I didn't? I like to question my actions a lot, my own behaviors, to get the full scope of what's happening. And the question I keep returning to is this: how do I shift perspectives so that I'm not always constantly seeing something one way? How can I take a different approach to something I normally do, and is there a benefit there? Working in technology, I'm naturally constantly immersed around tech, computer screens all day. And for a long time, I didn't think twice about it. That was just the environment. That was just the work. But I started wondering, what if I were to unplug for just hours at a time? Not forever, not some dramatic digital detox retreat. Just a few hours, a third of the day, most days. No tech, no music, no scrolling. I decided to finally do it. Walk away. And it's been incredible to do so ever since. I get more done. I think more clearly. And somewhere in that quiet, I remember that I exist outside of a screen. That was one experiment, but I kept running them. For a long time, I was fixated on material things. Everything that they advertise on TV, the web, on my smartphone. I'd given in to consumerism, shopping for the thrill of buying something new. I have quite a collection of objects, things I wanted badly, then forgot about. And one day, I just asked myself, what would happen if I stopped? If I stopped giving in to all the ads, the consumerism, just stopped. I tried it. And I can say I never felt richer. Because what I found when I stopped looking outward for the next thing to acquire was that I started looking inward instead, and I found something incredible. My mind is a vast library, a catalog of ideas and concepts waiting to be explored and discovered. It had been there the whole time. I'd just been too busy buying things to notice it. Then there was the napping. I love to take naps, always have. But I started asking, could it be that I'm just sleeping my life away? Not in a harsh way, just honestly. Could the rest be becoming a form of avoidance? Once I saw it that way, I didn't stop resting. Rest matters, I still believe that. But I found a better balance. I found that productivity, whether in hobbies or work, has been satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. To take a step back and acknowledge that I accomplished something, even if it's a small thing. There is something quietly profound about that feeling, about finishing, about having made something happen instead of waiting for something to happen to you. I think the through line in all of this is that I stopped living passively, stopped waiting for the next big thing to arrive, and started running small experiments on my own life, changing one variable at a time, seeing what shifts. And what I've learned is that your life is more malleable than you think. You don't need a dramatic overhaul. You just need a question. So what's one thing in your daily life you've never once questioned that maybe deserves a closer look? There's a library inside you. I know how that sounds, a little too poetic, a little too convenient. But stay with me for a second. When I stopped buying things I didn't need, when I stopped filling every quiet moment with content, with noise, with something to consume, I noticed something strange. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt full. Like walking into a room you'd always assumed was a closet and realizing it goes back much further than you thought. That's the inner library. It's not something you build, it's something you uncover. Everything you've ever experienced, every conversation that changed you, every book that cracked something open, every failure you survived, every moment of beauty you didn't expect, it's all in there, cataloged, waiting. The problem is most of us never go in. We stay at the entrance, we glance through the door and then reach for our phones instead. Because the library asks something of you that the scroll never does. It asks you to be still, to sit with yourself long enough that the shelves start to come into focus. And that, just that, is harder than it sounds. I started going in when I ran out of things to distract myself with. Not by choice at first, by accident. I'd unplugged, stepped away from the screen, and found myself with nothing to do. And in that nothing, something surfaced. A half-formed idea I'd had years ago and never followed. A question I'd buried under busyness. A memory that had something to teach me if I just sit with it long enough. The library doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send you a notification. It doesn't algorithm its way into your feed. It just waits, patiently, with a kind of confidence that only comes from knowing it has exactly what you're looking for, if you ever decide to look. What's in there is different for everyone. For me, it's been ideas, connections between things I didn't know were connected, a way of seeing something I've seen 100 times, but suddenly differently. Sometimes it's just clarity, the kind that doesn't come from thinking harder, but from thinking less, from letting the sediment settle, from being quiet long enough that what actually matters rises to the surface on its own. I think we've been trained to believe that more input equals more output, that if you want better ideas, you need more information, more stimulation, more. But the library doesn't work that way. The library rewards subtraction. The less noise you bring in, the more signal you find inside. And once you start finding it, once you start trusting that what's already in you is worth exploring, the compulsion to constantly consume starts to loosen its grip. You stop reaching for the phone every time a quiet moment opens up. You start letting the quiet be an invitation. It's not a dramatic shift. It happens slowly, then all at once. One day you realize you've been sitting in silence for 20 minutes, and it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like reading. So I want to ask you something. When was the last time you sat with yourself long enough, no input, no distraction, just you, to find out what was actually in there?